And we had a little bit of a break on Sunday. The radio silence ended in the form of a documentary, NBA Entertainment, the much hyped, ballyhooed release of the first 2 episodes of their anticipated docu-series, The Last Dance, about the 1990 Chicago Bulls. Now, in retrospective, on one of the great dynasties in sports history, a retrospective on that dynasty is what I meant to say, and with nothing else to entertain us, shall we say, at least sports-related, I settled my ass in a big chair, and I was a captive audience. And I watched the documentary, and you might have done that as well. Now, I will tell you that if this had been a normal weekend, this thing would not have aired. There would have been a bunch of NBA playoff games that would have taken place, the hockey playoffs going on, regular season baseball. But we know none of that is happening. So let us discuss the question, what were your takeaways from The Last Dance? Now, I've got my observations here. You've got pornography, Carol Baskin, and Bernie Madoff. And we will lock all these things together. Now, number one, for those who are too young, there we go. The band's a little late. This was a history lesson, right? The Chicago Bulls dynasty in a nutshell. And there's still 8 more episodes of this thing to go. But while the series was called The Last Dance, and it was billed as a look at the entire Chicago Bulls, the opening episode, as we anticipated, was essentially a Michael Jordan documentary, as it should have been a Michael Jordan documentary. Michael Jordan was the Chicago Bulls, and when you look at the history of the franchise, he is the Chicago Bulls in their entire history. Everyone else, especially in that time, while there were some good players and some Hall of Fame players, they were riding his coattails, is what they were doing, supporting actors. And MJ was the center of the universe. Everything else revolving around Michael Jordan in that time. Now, in the second episode, they did feature Scottie Pippen more, but made sure to still intertwine Michael Jordan in the documentary. They didn't want to get too far away from Jordan, and since it's been a while since the Chicago Bulls were any good, they blow right now. It's just absolutely terrible. If you're a Chicago Bulls apologist, if you go back to that time, or if you just happen to like the Bulls and you weren't around in that time, this was 1990 Chicago Bulls sports pornography is what it was. Michael Jordan was the only player where he could turn it on and off, and he never turned it off. That was a quote from Roy Williams, who had been an assistant for Dean Smith at North Carolina. Jordan had the swagger. I mean, they showed some highlights of Jordan from his North Carolina days, and he even did a rock the cradle dunk during a game for Roy Williams back in the day on the road for Duke, or against, I think it was against Duke. I don't know, somebody in the ACC. Anyway, and they showed another highlight. He hit the back of his head on the bottom of the backboard in college. You also had Jordan's buddy, Ahmad Rashad. And he was, wherever Jordan was, if you remember the 1990s, like Ahmad Rashad would like follow around Jordan. And he also hosted that NBA Inside Stuff back in the day. He made a few cameo appearances in this thing. Now, the second thing, and I learned this years ago from, I love watching documentaries, but every good documentary, every single one needs a villain. And for The Last Dance, they picked on who? Who is the villain? Now, it's only a couple episodes in, but there's a theme here. The portly general manager of the Chicago Bulls in that era, Jerry Krause. And through the first 2 episodes, a constant theme played out. Jerry Krause was portrayed as a card-carrying slime ball in this documentary. The now dead GM, he died a couple years back, Jerry Krause, the GM of that team, was a human. Well, you know, you're not a historian of the NBA if you've never heard of Jerry Krause. That's a bad job by you. But this guy was a human piñata, all right? He is the Carol Baskin of the basketball docu-series. You know, everyone was out to get Carol Baskin after watching Tiger King. Well, Jerry Krause, you look, he's a guy's cold-hearted. He's soulless, right? They highlighted that his little Napoleon complex. He had short man syndrome and all that. And Krause, one of the quotes in the documentary was that he had told Phil Jackson, the Zen master, before the final season of this Bulls run, he said, listen, you can go 82-0. and a championship. And I'm still not going to bring you back. And Krause got rid of Phil Jackson, for those that didn't watch the docuseries and don't remember, for Tim Floyd, who at the time was a top young coach at Iowa State. And how did that end up? Well, Jerry Krause was really jonesing to rebuild the Chicago Bulls. And rebuild is a weasel word for suck. And the Chicago Bulls, for the most part, since that franchise broke that team up with Jordan and Pippen, they had a brief stretch where they were competitive, but for the most part, they have been a dog's lunch ever since the Jordan years, which is a long time ago now, right? We're talking about over 20 years of Chicago Bulls basketball, and they've been terrible. But Tim Floyd, who Jerry Krause was so smitten with, had to bring him in, had to bring in Tim Floyd. Floyd has ended up the worst coach in Chicago Bulls history. He was only there 4 years. 49 and 190 was Tim Floyd's record. You could go to a cemetery and dig up with a shovel and get a cadaver and put a cadaver on the Bulls bench, and that coach would have about the same record over 4 seasons. Could be even better than Tim Floyd. Now, some of the other highlights that we must mention here that crisscross the documentary, the 2 episodes that I was able to check out there on Sunday night. Michael Jordan was asked about the 1980s. This was a highlight. 1980s, when he first arrived in Chicago, the Bulls traveling cocaine circus, as a writer called it. And Jordan, after saying he had never heard about that, Jordan laughed out loud hysterically. And now we know they were the bad news bears of the NBA. That entire era of the NBA was like a big powder paradise. The drugs was a-flowing in the NBA in those days. Not just the NBA. You had the drug trials with the Pittsburgh Pirates in Major League Baseball around that time. You had a lot of open debauchery going on in the sports world. But Michael Jordan, he told a story of walking around the hotel at one point his rookie year, and he was looking for his teammates. And he opened the door, and he saw the weed over there. He saw the coke over here, and he said the strippers are over on this side. So everything, and he decided, he claimed he got out of it. Now we know Jordan has dabbled in some of his own excess over the years, but at that point, a young, naive Jordan, at least the way he told the story, he hightailed it. He got out of there. Former President Barack Obama and former President Bill Clinton both made the cut in different episodes here. Obama was shown, and they had the Chiron graphic, which was interesting. They put him up as former Chicago resident, which I think is the first time ever that a former president has been described as a former resident of a city. That was interesting. And then, you can go on and on here. It was a different time, right? Cocaine was flowing in the NBA in the 80s. Michael Jordan's rookie year, the Bulls, as they talked about in this documentary, they were being outdrawn by an indoor soccer team. And we're talking about many, many years ago. The most expensive tickets to watch a Bulls game, less than $12. The most expensive tickets to watch a Bulls game. The cheap seats were less than $5. And we can go on. Pat Riley looked like he was like some kind of retired mob boss in the documentary. I don't know what was going on with him. He's enjoying life. They highlighted the doubters, which was enjoyable, right? I enjoyed Mark Eaton, who at the time was playing for the Utah Jazz. And Mark Eaton said, "You can't have a one-man team," as he questioned Jordan. The most damning quote, though, was from Walt Clyde Frazier. Down goes Frazier, the star of the 1980s Knicks. And he said Michael can't carry a team because he's not 7 foot. That was the quote from Walt Frazier. He was off by that much. It's just insane. He can't carry the team. As we look back. Anyway, listen, they focused on the year that Jordan hurt himself. That was an interesting part of this. The part featured this weird dichotomy between that era of basketball, that era of sports, and what's going on in recent years here. Jordan wanted to play. The Bulls team doctors said that there was a 90% chance that Jordan would be fine, but there was a 10% chance of his career ending with injury. I think we might have it. Do we have this clip here? I think we might have this clip we can play. It was one of the interesting parts of the docuseries here as they go back and forth. Yeah, all right, here we go. Let's play it right now. Here we go.
Michael asked him, well, if I play, what percentage is there that I'm going to get hurt again? Doctor said, yeah, 10%.
And I just lost it. I said, look, it's 10% chance, but it's 90% chance that I won't.
And then I chimed in to the doctors, what happens if the 10% kicks in? And they said, well, then his career would be over.
Wow, everybody's just thinking about the negative. Well, I think the glass is half full. Everybody thinks it's half empty.
So I said to Michael, you're not understanding the risk-reward ratio. If you had a terrible headache and I gave you a bottle of pills and 9 of the pills would cure you and 1 of the pills would kill you, would you take a pill?
And I look at him, I said, depends on how bad the headache is.
That's a pretty decent quote right there, right? 10 pills, 9 of them would cure you, 1 of them would kill you. Would you take it? And it does. I mean, listen, I've had some terrible migraines over the years. You probably have too. And it really depends on how bad the migraine is. If the migraine is bad enough, you're like, well, dying might not be such a bad thing here. Anyway, listen, today you compare and contrast that era of the NBA. And to be fair, the Chicago Bulls were trying to tank. The Chicago Bulls were attempting to get lottery balls even back in the early 80s, much like the teams today are doing. But Jordan wanted to play. Now, they allowed him to play. They put him on a strict minute limit on how long he could play per game. But Jordan was able to play. He won the battle. And you look at what's going on now with the players. No one rushes to come back. In fact, if you rush to come back, it's sports malpractice. You shouldn't play unless you're over 100% healthy. And it's what has happened since then and now is people have been babied, coddled, and worshipped. And we have the byproduct of that, trust the process and all this nonsense. All right, final point. So Michael Jordan did not look particularly healthy to me. Now, maybe it was my television here. His eyes appeared a little off there. Kind of reminded of me when I had my gallbladder issues. And I had some, my eyes were like turning colors and stuff. It was not a good time. I hope he's all right. But some are wondering why Jordan released the documentary now. What was his motivation here? And that's kind of an open question, right? It's an open question. Now, we mentioned Scottie Pippen. He was featured more in episode 2 of the documentary. And from small town Hamburg, Arkansas, one of 12 kids, they highlighted his house growing up in rural America. And his brother and his father were paralyzed, and they were both in wheelchairs around the Pippen house there. And I also, and I don't know that I had heard this in the past, maybe I had, but Pippen was 6'1" his freshman year in college, and he started as the equipment manager at Central Arkansas. And then he started growing, and he kept growing. And then all of a sudden, he blossomed into an NBA player. But when he was drafted, they announced his name as Scott Pippen. Not Scottie. He was Scott Pippen when he was drafted. He had the supersonic hat on and all that. They also showed Charles Oakley, some horseplay in the locker room, slapping Scottie Pippen as a rookie. Today, that would be a felony. Charles Oakley would be thrown out of the NBA and would be shamed, internet shamed and mocked. How dare you? There's no room for that kind of activity. You cannot have horseplay at all. No. Safe spaces are required. Absolutely. And many people on social media were furious at just one last final point, the money aspect. And it was highlighted in the second documentary that Pippen had signed a 7-year contract in 1991 for $18 million, which is a lot of money. $18 million is a lot of money. But compared to everyone else, it was not a lot of money. And by the time the contract was getting towards the end, Pippen was the 6th highest paid Bulls player. He was 122nd in salary in the NBA. And when you look back at that, and no one else is talking about this, I'll be the only one to talk about this, that Scottie Pippen should actually be celebrated because his inability to handle his finances, he was the Bernie Madoff of the 90s Chicago Bulls, right? His lack of economic foresight helped build the Chicago Bulls dynasty. More than a hometown discount, this was a secret weapon that has been forgotten and overlooked. Tom Brady is often celebrated for giving the Patriots a discount, helping them out, not getting top dollar while playing quarterback in New England. But in reality, he was a pauper compared to Scottie Pippen, right? Scottie Pippen was like making peanuts compared to all the other players of equal ability in the NBA. And sure, it sucks, I guess, to be grossly underpaid or Not overpaid, but underpaid. That salary helped Chicago keep its dynasty going and let them spend money on other players and share the sugar. How about that?